I'm super excited about Lill Erickson, and at the end of her talk, if we have a little bit of time, we may be able to take a couple of questions, but if not, definitely stick around afterwards and we will talk about that. Lill Erickson founded the Western Sustainability Exchange in 1994 to protect the landscape of the Northern Rockies and to strengthen rural economies. And we love that around here too. We're passionate about our rural economies. She specializes in strategies that incentivize agricultural business to convert to regenerative practices. So you're going to love this lady. She's really passionate about what she's going to talk to you about today. Any other words on Lill?
Oh, yeah. So she's one of the first people that I had talked to. I think it was back in like November. And I was referred to her from Gravis Law, one of our partners, and Michelle, who's in Bozeman, I'm pretty sure. And she's like, hey, you need to talk to Lill. She's already doing these things around, you know, the carbon programs, the grasslands, the sustainable regenerative ag. And so I had an hour-long conversation with her, and it was just such a relief knowing that this network was already established. Mm-hmm. And so being from western North Dakota, central eastern Montana was kind of our vacation spots. We'd go in the winter, we'd go skiing, snowboarding. And so I'm super excited for her presentation because they got so much going on that is just super exciting. You know, so I guess without further ado.
Yeah, so if you have any questions, keep them in mind for now or later. But let's give us a warm welcome to the stage for Lill Erickson.
Lill.
Well, it's just such an honor to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
There you go.
Okay. Oh, this is so intimidating. This thing in front of me. But it's been a really wonderful conference, and I've learned so much, and I've met such interesting people. Thank you so much for including me. So Western Sustainability Exchange is a regenerative ag organization, and we're based in Livingston, Montana, and we work throughout the Northern Rockies, so all of Montana, portions of Wyoming, and Idaho. And I want to spend just a few minutes talking about our name, because yesterday we had a conversation about the word sustainability, and that actually, you know, we don't want to sustain what's not working. But it's important in our name because sustainability for us means really our ability to sustain what we value. And what we value are the wide open spaces that are the hallmark of the West, really, and certainly of the Northern Rockies, and our incomparable wildlife resource. The wildlife biologists and conservation biologists have said that our wildlife is second only to that of the Serengeti in Eastern Africa. So it's a remarkable place environmentally. And a big part of the reason that it is because of the stewardship of the farm and ranch families, many of whom have been on the land for over a century. And it is their stewardship that has actually kept our region in such good health. But of course, there are issues, and we do need to regenerate the land where it needs to be regenerated and sustain it where it already has a lot of integrity. And while we're rich in all these environmental and cultural resources, our region does struggle economically, and so part of our mission is to bolster the rural economy, and we believe the best way to do that is through regenerative agriculture. And so we have a number of programs, but our primary focus area is to provide landowners with information, tools, technical assistance, and economic incentives to make the transition to regenerative ranching practices. So why regenerative practices? And many of you heard a lot about that yesterday, but I'll go over what we believe are the important values of regenerative ranching practices. And they have consistently shown that they improve soil health significantly. And by that, they increase plant diversity and vigor. They strengthen our ability to move through drought, so drought resiliency, protects water quality and wildlife habitat, and increases biodiversity, and captures carbon. And I'll talk more about that in a little while. So to date, and it's together we've achieved this. This is not something that WSC, the little organization, has done. It's all of us working together. We have reached out to over 1,500 ranchers to inform each other about the benefits and practical application of regenerative practices. And because of that, we know that we've managed at least, or influenced management, facilitated management, on at least 1.5 million acres of land in Montana with regenerative practices. We have a companion program that I won't talk too much about. It's a market connection program, so producers that have market-ready product or branded meat programs, we connect our producers to markets primarily in the culinary and natural food sectors. And so there are not that many producers actually that have market-ready product, but for those that do, we generate sales, and it's about $1.7 million a year for those producers. And now, over the last couple of years, we have launched a new program to sequester carbon, and we actually are going to meet or exceed the goal of 100,000 acres sequestering approximately 50,000 tons of carbon annually, and I'll talk more about that later. So we've discovered by working all together that, and ranchers have told us over and over, that what they need they need tools. They need tools to understand what regenerative practices are and how to actually go from where they are to where they want to be. And the purpose really of regenerative practices is to rebuild natural processes and put nature back to work on the ranch. And so WSC, together with our ranching partners, have created a regenerative ranch toolbox. And the purpose of it is actually to rebuild those natural processes and create healthy soil, increase water infiltration and retention, really important now, critical now, to cycle nutrients in a much better way, to increase the function of biological systems and really increase biological diversity, and of course to sequester carbon. And so our toolbox actually has 5 tools, and the first one is education. So we organize a series of workshops and webinars and field days with some of the world's top presenters, truly. And recently, in recent years, we've really focused a lot on soil health. How do you bring soil back to health? And focusing a lot on the practical application of intensive rest rotational grazing and low-stress stockmanship, which is an incredibly powerful tool to get your livestock to do what you want them to do without beating them up, essentially, which I'm sure some people wouldn't appreciate that, but it's a really great way to move cattle. And then range riding as a tool to mob graze and move cattle efficiently without a lot of fences. So the second tool is a regenerative ranch roadmap, and this is under development. We're in the 3rd stage of beta testing, and we really hope to have this available in the next few months. And its purpose is, it's a self-assessment tool that ranchers have asked for, and they say, okay, I like the idea of regenerative ranching, but I don't really understand all the components, and I have no idea where I am in this process. So the purpose of the roadmap is to help landowners understand kind of the different areas of regenerative ranching and where their operation falls in those particular areas. And so one of the areas is in soil, another is water, the third is biodiversity, the fourth is just land. How is the land being managed? How are the livestock being managed? How is the grazing really being implemented? What are the economics of the operation? And how are the people that are part of the operation being involved in the management? So once a landowner completes the assessment, the self-assessment, the app that we're developing will produce an automated and judgment-free report that gives a baseline score for those different areas and considerations for improvement. It's totally up to the landowner what they want to do with it. But if they want to move forward and say, wow, you know, I'd like to be a lot higher up on the soil score or the grazing score or whatever, we can actually help folks develop a whole ranch plan or a plan just for that area and provide technical assistance, or if they, or connect them to resources for technical assistance if they need it. But it's totally up to the rancher. As I said, this is in the 3rd stage of beta testing, and we hope to have it available in the next few months. There's a companion app that we're developing as well, and it is a Grazing Scout dashboard. And the purpose of this is to provide scientific data, essentially, to landowners for timely and proactive decision-making. And really, ranchers had asked for this. We created a science council with scientists and ranchers, and the scientists were saying, wow, there's all this data that's being collected out there that we think would be useful to ranchers. And the ranchers were saying, well, yeah, it'd be really useful, but we didn't even know it existed. And I'm sorry, you guys, but the way you talk to each other is not really very practical for us. And so we've worked together to create an app that would take scientific information and put it in a very usable form for landowners to use for management decisions. And so it has 3 different areas of data. One is predictive data, like weather, what's happening with weather, snowmelt dates, forage production, that sort of thing. The second is grazing management data. What are your herd sizes, pasture sizes, rest periods, grazing intensity? And this is for the ranchers to look at. And then ecological and biodiversity trends. What's happening to the keystone species? What's happening to bird counts? And that may not be so valuable at this time, but there is an emerging market called the ecosystem services market, and they're going to be very interested in what these trends are. So ranchers can use this, and if they're collecting their own data through, through monitoring, they can upload that data onto this dashboard as well. And then we are talking with some of the grazing management companies that provide software for grazing management tools to see if we can't interface with them so that everything flows into a grazing management system and is easily accessed by ranchers. WSE is keeping all this information confidential, so you don't have to worry about your specific data being used, but we are looking at it in aggregate so that it gives us a better understanding of, well, where is more information needed? What should we do a workshop on, or a field day, or who's becoming really an expert in a particular area? Because we think the expertise, like our science council is made up of all sciences, because there are the scientists that are the scientists, and then there are the ranchers that are actually scientists. And so there's a lot of knowledge, and so we're looking for ways to have people cross-pollinate and share what they know too. We also do provide on a limited basis ecosystem monitoring, because we believe that you can't manage what you don't measure, and you can't really understand your effectiveness unless you track change over time. But we understand too that it's very difficult. I know a lot of landowners want to do the monitoring, but wow, they're really busy, and it is kind of a pain, and well, how do you get started? And there's a lot of reasons that ecosystem monitoring really doesn't occur. But if you're going to enter some of these new markets, like the carbon market, and if the ecosystem services market really comes into being as it's predicted to do, monitoring is going to be very important. And so we provide monitoring right now for a partner that also speaks more about native energy for the carbon program. And it has to do, we monitor for soil organic matter and baseline levels of carbon, soil carbon, the percent of cover of plants to bare ground, because that can really tell you a lot about your management. And it's fairly easy to see, oh, my management's really changing because this area had a lot of bare ground, and now look at it, it has a lot of covers. And it's a very good indicator. Soil moisture and water infiltration, and we are working with a great organization out of Bozeman called the Yellowstone Ecological Research Center. They are a science-based organization, and they've developed some very cool tools around soil moisture and water flows, and so we are working with them on establishing some permanent soil moisture probes, but also these pogo probes where you can go out into a pasture and you can take a reading what the soil moisture is, and you can do your management, and you can come back and compare it with the weather trends, but also to see if you're changing soil moisture. So it's a really great tool, and we appreciate very much working with, we call them YERC, Yellowstone Ecological Research Center. We also monitor for plant and habitat types and species diversity. The last tool we have is way more powerful than we thought when we first started it, and that is creating a peer-to-peer support system for people who want to make the transition to regenerative practices. And it started out by actually Native Energy and some other companies saying, well, what do you think about kind of getting ranchers together? And then COVID hit, and that wasn't going to really work. So we started organizing Zoom calls with ranchers to talk about whatever they wanted to talk about in terms of how you apply regenerative practices on the ground. And they became really popular, and the ranchers said, we want to do this monthly. And they actually asked us to do them one Sunday evening a month. And now we have about 80 ranchers who are participating on and off. They don't all come on to the Zoom call at the same time, but many of them do. And they just talk about whatever they want to talk about. And there's some great conversations about, well, I'm interested in doing, you know, grazing in the winter. How the heck do you do that? And one of our ranchers will say, well, I've been doing it, and this is how it works, and it's been pretty cool. And they just talk through this. And they are building a support network and mentoring each other. And it's so helpful because a lot of these folks are, you know, they're the innovators. And in their neighborhood, they're kind of the only one that's wanting to do this, and they're feeling really isolated, and it's kept them from moving forward. But now they're within a group of people who are saying, this isn't crazy. This is working, and we are profiting, and this is how we're making it work. And sometimes it's really important just within a family, and those of you who are in a family agricultural structure, you can know that you know, you can have the innovators in the family, and you can have the other folks who have probably more power saying, no, I don't think so, we've done it this way for a long time. So it really helps people feel that they're not alone, and that they have some guideposts from people that they know are practicing it on the ground, not somebody who learned about it and came in and told them how to do it. They are helping each other, and we call these sessions bull sessions, and that was actually a term coined by our board chair, who's Roger Inderlin, and he's with the Inderlin Ranch north of Big Timber, Montana. He's very, very creative, and I love that term, bull sessions. So the primary strategy that I'll talk about today, and one that we really promote, is high-intensity, short-duration grazing with long pasture rest. So in high-intensity grazing, that puts a lot of people off all of a sudden. Oh, no, you're going to graze even more. But actually, it is short periods of intensive grazing on small pastures with controlled moves, and you can either do it through pasture size or with range riders. Range riders are actually quite effective in doing this. Followed by long periods of pasture rest, so the land has a chance to regenerate. And most ranching in our region is done with conventional season-long grazing, and so ranchers turn their cattle out on summer pastures, and of course they check on them. You know, they're good managers of the livestock. They don't just leave them to their own devices, but they do let them kind of go where they want, and the pasture sizes are generally very large. And so this picture shows pretty much what happens. Cattle spread out, and they're like choosing what they want to eat, because they'd be like me, you know, choosing the chocolate and avoiding the broccoli. And so you get overutilization of the preferred grasses and underutilization or no utilization of the grasses that they don't really like. And you compare that to regenerative grazing, where a pasture, if you take this picture and you look at breaking that big pasture into smaller paddocks and fencing off those riparian zones, because in the other more season-long grazing, you really don't worry about the riparian zones and the streams get hammered, many by overuse and the cattle going down and getting a drink wherever they want. With regenerative grazing, you do protect those riparian zones and you provide access to water, of course, but it's in a more controlled way. And you don't have to break a pasture into fenced areas. You can actually use range riders to do this too. And some of our ranchers in our region are using those very effectively. And not only do they facilitate the consolidation of the herds, they also do proactive protection against predators and keeping cattle, away from noxious weeds that are poisonous and stuff like that. So in high-intensity grazing, you bunch the cattle into tight groups and you move them often. And then you allow that pasture to have long periods of rest. And by doing that, you get a desirable herd impact. And as you can see from this picture, the cattle are pretty much together. The cows are with their calves, and you see a lot of deposits of manure. And this is very positive because that hoof action breaks up the soil capping and it spreads out the fertilizer, the natural fertilizer of manure and urine across the landscape. And I know a lot of folks are really concerned about that, but one thing that it's important to remember is that in our area especially, this land grew up, evolved with millions and millions of grazing animals, bison and elk and antelope, moving frequently because there were thousands of predators that were keeping them out of the riparian zones. Go get a drink, but you get out of there. You don't want to linger at the water hole. And moving them. And so they remembered that safety was in a herd, and they moved all along the landscape, and they gave the land what it needed in terms of the natural fertilizers and the hooved actions. And so that's what we're trying to mimic with this grazing strategy. And it really, the breaking up of the soil capping really improves water infiltration and nutrient cycling. And so there are a lot of benefits to the rancher of this kind of practice. There's greater forage production, healthier cattle, resiliency to drought, again, really important in these days, and little or no bare ground, which is important too. But there's a lot of benefits to everyone, not just the rancher, and that's more clean and abundant water, protected riparian zones, improved fish and wildlife habitat, and greater biodiversity. And you can see in this picture, on the right is a pasture that's been grazed with more conventional grazing practices. And you can see the stream is very shallow, it's wide, there's a lot of erosion of the stream bank, and there's virtually no riparian protection along that stream. But in a very short amount of time, when the rancher was experimenting, like, well, I don't want to go full bore into this, but let's try it. In just less than 2 years, you see the stream actually start to deepen and narrow, and more vegetation, and this is after the pasture's been grazed, more vegetation along the stream. So there's a lot of benefits for the public as well as to the landowner. A lot of benefits below ground to everyone, and that is healthier soil. Greater abundance of the important microorganisms, and we heard a lot more about that yesterday, just the critical role they play. And improved mycorrhizal sheath. So if you guys haven't heard about this, the mycorrhizal sheath, according to the soil scientists that are like over the moon about it, this is where the magic happens. And it is really cool. So the mycorrhizal sheath, as I understand it, and I'm not a soil scientist, it's fungi that creates kind of a sticky matter along the root. It actually can be inside the root as well as on the outside of the root. And it protects the root in a lot of different ways. It actually provides protection for soil moisture and for changes in soil chemistry like alkalinity and acidity. And it facilitates the bringing up of nutrients and minerals that are far below. So there's a symbiotic relationship between the fungi and the plant. And in the plant, what I think is so exciting about it is that there is almost a commerce that is happening underground. So the plant is taking sunlight and photosynthesizing it, taking carbon dioxide molecule, breaking off the oxygen atoms and releasing them to the air. Thank you, plants. And pulling that carbon deep through its system, combining it with water, creating a sugar, moving the sugar through the plant into the roots, feeding the roots as it needs, but it's also feeding the microorganisms in the soil. And the fungi have this ability, they have a kind of a root that is much finer, that can go farther into the soil, deep into the soil, and pull up minerals like nitrogen and phosphorus and boron and the things that the plant needs, but the plant roots can't get down that far, aren't fine enough to provide that. And they can actually connect with each other and other plants. And so there's this cool almost commerce. You give me sugar, and I'll give you nitrogen. It's cool. And the ranchers we work with refer to it often as the livestock in the soil. And there's a lot of benefits economically to ranch operations for these regenerative practices. They reduce production costs because a lot of ranchers really get into ranching and stop actually farming. And all the production costs that go with farming, all the equipment and fuels and fertilizers and pesticides and herbicides, all of those things are expensive. And so those expenses are reduced or eliminated. And then it does create this really nutritious vegetation that's so great for livestock and wildlife and everything. And because of these practices, there are a growing number of markets that are very interested in the way food is being produced. And so by using these practices, ranchers have access to new and lucrative markets in the culinary sector and in the natural food sector, and now in the carbon market, and we think within a couple of years, the ecosystem services market. So all of that adds up to increasing ranch profitability. I want to transition now more to the role of grasslands and carbon, and carbon capture. So 40% of the world's Earth's surface is in grasslands. It's really second only to oceans in the amount of surface area on the planet. Unfortunately, according to the UN Food and Agricultural Organization and all their research, 80% of the grasslands of the world are in poor to marginal condition. But there's a growing body of scientists that are saying, but if we brought the grasslands back to health, they could play an essential role in mitigating climate change. So there's lots of opinions about this right now, but there's a recent study by UC Davis, a 2018 study, that really finds that grasslands could be more resilient carbon sinks than forests as the climate changes because they have the ability to store more carbon underground, leading to fewer carbon losses from fire and drought. And that doesn't diminish the value of forests in mitigating climate change, but it adds to the power of grasslands that cover far more surface area than forests to be part of the solution. And western ranch lands contain some of the most significant grasslands left in the United States. So for that region, WSE has created the Montana Grasslands Carbon Program, which is a nature-based carbon capture project. And we're using the power of the voluntary carbon market to incentivize the conversion to regenerative practices. And right now our goal is to sequester 500,000 tons of carbon annually on 1 million acres in 4.5 years. We are in partnership with Native, which is a public benefit corporation out of Vermont, and they've been a really great partner. They brought the program to us and said they wanted to launch a carbon project on grasslands, and I think that this is still true. We're the largest grasslands carbon program, second largest in the world, second only to one in Kenya. And their role is they are really the access to the carbon market. They're a carbon program developer, and they're a retail seller of carbon offset credits. Our role is implementation on the ground. And so the way a landowner can get involved in our project is the first thing to do is submit a letter of interest to Native outlining 3 different things. The first is, what are the past management practices? What have you been doing on your land in as much detail as is possible? The second part of it is, what do you want to do? How do you want to change your operation using regenerative practices? And then the third thing is, what do you need to do that? What do you need to jumpstart it? A lot of producers would like to be doing this, but man, they need more fences, or they need water developments on the uplands, or they need a lot of things. So what do you need? Do you need fencing, water developments, range riders, more educational opportunities on regenerative practices? All of that's outlined in this letter of interest that goes to Native. In the meantime, WSC, working with Native and another company called Soil for the Future, we're out there doing baseline soil carbon sampling, finding out. So this was the past management, and what kind of carbon levels do we have as a result of that, and also as a result of just nature and natural processes. And it serves as a valuable baseline measurement of soil carbon stocks. So we sample for soil organic carbon, of course, bulk density, water infiltration rates, soil moisture, percent of cover of both live plants and bare ground, and we've done this sampling over 175,000 acres in Montana to date. And this is really important information because it goes into a formula that predicts additionality. So additionality means how much additional carbon over baseline levels could be sequestered if these practices were in place. This is very, very important for the carbon market and the value of carbon offset credits. The model that we are using was developed by Dr. Mark Ritchie, and here's Mark doing his monitoring. He was a really cool guy. He's with a company called Soils for the Future out of Syracuse University, and he developed this model that's also being used on the Kenyu project. And basically, the model takes the information of this is what was going on the land, this is what was produced in terms of carbon because of that management and the natural factors, this is what's being planned, and it predicts how much additional carbon could be sequestered as a result of these changes in grazing. If the amount of carbon, additional carbon, is significant enough to be valuable in the carbon market, then Native enters into long-term contracting with the ranchers. And so the contracts right now are 30-year contracts where the ranchers commit to keep the land in grazing, which means no housing developments, no leasing for oil and gas, using regenerative grazing practices as in their plan, submitting annual grazing plans, submitting post-grazing plans, and WSC is involved in this whole process along the way, helping ranchers do this, and allowing sampling and monitoring. In return, Native pays ranchers carbon offset payments, and this is Jeff Bernicke. He's the CEO of Native, with our rancher, Roger Angelin, who coined the term bull sessions and was one of the first ranchers to sign on to the program. He's just north of Big Timber, Montana. And Native can pay offsets in 2 different ways. One is they have a very innovative program called Help Build, which provides upfront financing for the infrastructure that may be needed. And then they are paid off in carbon over about a 5-year period. Or ranchers could just be paid annual payments based on additional carbon levels, and those are called vintage payments. Our program right now is being verified by Verra, which is the world's most widely used voluntary greenhouse gas validation program. This is a very rigorous and important process because Verra ensures the credibility of the program and that it actually is going to achieve the reduction in emissions as promised. And because of Verra certification, tradable credits are then issued and can be sold on the carbon market to offset emissions. Our program is considered to have very high value credits because we have, not only are we sequestering carbon, but we have outstanding co-benefits of improved ecosystem function, because as I said earlier, we are located in one of the last temperate zone ecosystems remaining on the planet. We have critical habitat for threatened and endangered species like these young grizzly bears, and it increases biodiversity, so there's a lot of value in our credits besides just carbon. The current buyers that are participating through the Help Build, providing the financing for Help Build, are Xanterra Parks and Resorts. They're the largest concession company in the country, and they provide the concessions for Yellowstone and Glacier, and they're long-term partners of ours. We love Xanterra. Trillium Asset Management, Allbirds, which is a sustainable shoe company, Reformation, which is a sustainable apparel company, Everlane, which is also sustainable apparel, and Gucci. We're kind of amazed that the fashion industry has been really stepping forward as being the first to invest. Thank you for that. Early results is actually by the end of the month, we're going to have 134,000 acres under contract on 9 ranches instead of 5, and we'll be sequestering closer to that 80,000 tons of carbon annually, or about 2 to 2.5 million tons over 30 years on just those 9 ranches. Our goal in 5 years or 4.5 years is 50 ranches. We think once we get validation, it's really going to step up. 1 million acres, sequestering 550,000 tons of carbon annually, or 20 million plus tons over 30 years. Our goal, WSE's goal, is to offset all the emission from Montana households, but that doesn't take us off the hook to do what we can where we are in our own lives. And we do this because WSE is dedicated to advancing regenerative grazing because we believe it is truly our most effective tool to address climate change, but also to conserve the best of the West. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. Really appreciate the ability to just share with you our program and to learn from all of you. I'm happy to answer any questions you have, and then I think there'll be a panel too. So thanks again. Any questions?
Just signed on
Who
with
would've
Gucci.
Gucci, hey, that's exciting. That's really exciting.
It's making, regenerative ag is making interesting bedfellows.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I was like, well, let's get Gucci on the phone and see how they want to participate.
Let's go.
Outside of just the voluntary carbon market. But no, I think you guys are doing fantastic work in not just Montana. I mean, you guys are, kind of moving towards the region, I would say, right? Right.
We have ranchers in the program, not in the carbon program, but in our larger body of work from what we call the Yellowstone ecosystem, which is parts of Wyoming and Idaho, as well as all of Montana. And we're getting a lot of interest from the Dakotas.
Dakotas, I was going to say.
Yeah.
Where would you say your biggest challenges are on letting people know what you're doing? Is it just doing things like this, building awareness? Or?
Yeah, building awareness. We're a small staff, and we haven't spent a lot of time reaching beyond the ranching community. And so getting the word out is really important. Because this is pretty innovative, and also because we're not advancing any policy changes.
Yep.
There's limited funding that would come to nonprofits because most of the traditional funding is for more policy changes, and we don't engage in that.
Yep.
Appreciate it. I mean, there's a role for it, but we don't do it. So there are some challenges there. But there's such interest in the ranching community. I've never seen as many people open, mostly because of what it can do for soil. It just makes sense, and drought resiliency.
What is an industry or a group that you would love to sit at the table with and collaborate on for solutions that you haven't yet had that opportunity?
Well, more of the companies that are developing their sustainability goals and carbon goals to really understand the power of a nature-based carbon capture program. And also the importance of biodiversity, because people are getting really, really concerned about climate change, but the effects on biodiversity are very sobering, very sobering. And so having companies realize you can do the two, you can do them both, and increase access to wonderful food.
Definitely, and I think that that value benefit to, you know, the government, we need to convince them that these things are important. So the policy, yeah, we know they're politically motivated, I guess you could say, but they need to provide opportunities outside of that political sphere, because it just makes sense from a community or a regional standpoint. It just builds capacity, builds resilience. And so I think that that's one of the things that we're trying to focus on, is how do we engage the, you know, kind of the government around, you know, kind of being more involved and more open, you know, because oftentimes, I think we talked about it yesterday, where there's that tunnel vision a little bit, you know, and even corporations are stepping outside of that now, because they do realize there's a lot of value, you know, kind of going outside of the traditional thinking. And I think you guys are doing a great job of really expanding those horizons.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Just one quick thing. We do have a question. Just wanted to say, with what we're doing, it doesn't depend on it. You can do it right away. You don't have to wait for approvals or permit approvals or anything. You can just start doing it, and that's what we really like.
Collective action.
I'm not sure how to pose this question. We've been into regenerative for 25 or 30 years, and what we found happening now is the climate is drying. Fire is doing more damage than any cow ever could have. And so I don't know where to start the conversation or how to start it. I see all the grass and all that really left good, and that's fine as long as it keeps raining. And we live in the desert of Idaho, and we run in the mountains of Idaho. And we had a fire last year of 100,000 acres in the mountains of Idaho. Mm-hmm. And we'd been regenerative grazing that piece of ground. There's 36,000 acres in there for 25 years. And we thought we were doing the right thing. But we're not sure, I'm not sure, absolutely positively not sure, that we shouldn't be more worried about fire mitigation along with this regenerative movement than you can even imagine. And I'd like to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I certainly think we're going to be seeing a lot more fire. And, you know, I really don't know. I'm not a fire specialist. What, though, we're seeing from the mycorrhizal relationship with the root system is it is helping retain what moisture is in the soil, helping grasslands actually weather some of these conditions in a better way than places that don't have that mycorrhizal relationship. So, you know, I really don't know how to answer your question, other than it is a huge issue, and it'll probably be more important in the future, and we should have a real discussion about that with people who have a lot more knowledge than I about it. But thank you. And thank you for your efforts.
Thank you for what you guys do. We appreciate it. And just a comment and kind of a discussion. I think as I travel the whole country, we've been in Mexico and seen deserts completely regenerated. I think one of the things we're still missing, coming to your point, is we don't give, the land is so degraded and a lot of the range is so degraded that one of the things that I've learned in this last 2 or 3 years coming from Chihuahua, Mexico, and being among some of the top ranchers is recovery time. Mm-hmm. And we're still not giving enough recovery times to our range, because we always have to remember we're in a hole. And for Alejandro to restore his range, it took 12 years. And they get 6 to 10 inches, a lot hotter than Montana would ever mm-hmm. get. Mm-hmm. A lot less rain than Montana would get, and yet they were able to restore and get ecological restoration. I think one of the things we forget is, I think one of the things that we're beginning to observe with us is recovery time, that sometimes you may only get one bite depending on the season that you're in. And sometimes you might not even get a bite at all. And so that is a huge struggle for ranchers. You think about where ranchers are financially, it's already a struggle already. and to tell them that you can't go back for 16, 17 months because it's so degraded and so that the system can recover, it's a big thing. And so we've had that struggle, but I'm telling you, one more comment is that I would have never believed that we could have turned that Alejandro could have turned the desert into a prairie. But one of the things you brought up was very key is infrastructure. Infrastructure is everything. Watering and the hot wire and the things, they did it with just one strand of hot wire, and they were able to, on a 30,000 acre ranch, and be able to do what they've done is a miracle. It can be done, but I think you're right about fire. Fire is an incredible, it's a tool, but you have to be very, very cautious with that tool. And I don't think we talk about it enough.
One last thought would be that we've just seen it's so important to bring scientists that have a knowledge about ecosystem functions together with landowners that have knowledge about ecosystem function and really sit down and figure it out instead of one trying to outdo the other, but really like, whoa, what are we going to do? Creating those relationships is what creates the forward movement, which creates the positive action. And so I hope that can be happening around fire and changing climate. Thank you for all you're doing.
Thank you so much.